Going.
Awesome.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 2 of season 2 of the Clean Fuels podcast here with Piper Maddox. Join us every few weeks, every month or so, for a dedicated conversation with clean tech and renewable energy leaders across the space for a intense conversation on what's going on in the market from a skill set and a hiring perspective, also just general current events. My name is Alex, your host, as always, principal recruiter here at Piper Maddox, focused across the clean fuels and hydrogen market. I sit out of our New York City headquarters and main office. We're joined here today by Claire Broido Johnson, a terrific leader in the space. Really excited for the conversation today. We'll really be focusing on what your career ladder can look like in clean tech, certain kind of advice for different people in junior parts of their career versus maybe a C-level executive. Of course, as always, we'll dive in on trends in the space, et cetera. Claire brings a plethora of experience and really excited to get into it. But for all of our listeners, thanks for joining and excited to dive in. Claire, yeah, maybe just a brief intro on your kind of background and maybe passion for the space, and then we can dive in on all of the above.
Great. Thank you, Alex, very much. And thanks to Piper Maddox for having the podcast. My name's Claire Broido Johnson. I've been in the climate tech space since 2002. Or even a little bit earlier, I helped Enron finance their first wind turbines. I worked Constellation on their first renewable contracts, founded SunEdison back in 2003 with Jigar Shah. Spent a couple years in the federal government deploying a bunch of stimulus package under the Obama administration, and have worked for a whole bunch of different startups in the climate tech space since, with a small 3-year stint investing in early stage startups as well. So I've looked at a lot of solar, energy efficiency, electric vehicles, and now moving back to solar again. So happy to be having this conversation with you, Alex. Thanks.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm glad you've come on. Yeah, much appreciated. As far as kind of where things are at in the market in general, this episode's going live just right into Q1, looking to be a really exciting potential year from a growth and a hiring standpoint in Piper Maddox's perspective in 2024 across all of clean tech. Obviously, my domain in clean fuels, hydrogen, et cetera, even more so, quite exciting. But for you, Claire, maybe just kind of blanket question, what are you seeing and expecting across all of renewables and clean tech from a market sentiment across any kind of vertical at the moment?
Sure, big question. Well,
Yeah.
there certainly continues to be a lot of interest in climate tech, and certainly a lot of, we're seeing a lot more huge natural disasters happening, right? So it's almost impossible now to put your head under the sand and say climate
Yeah.
change isn't happening, though there certainly are people who are continuing to do that. And there's tons of climate tech investments that make a whole lot of sense, even if you don't believe in climate change. So there
Yeah.
will be continued investment in climate change. There are tons of analyses that have been put together. I'm a big fan of climate tech VC. There's a bunch of analysis and a bunch of reporting that takes place and Bloomberg NEF about the amount of money that's going into climate tech startups. There's a lot of interest in hydrogen, certainly more and more interest in electric vehicles, and still a ton of interest in solar. Solar panel prices have gone down, construction costs continue to go down. And it makes a lot of sense. There's still billions of square feet of roof space that haven't been addressed across the United States. And there's, retail energy prices continue to rise. So that plus the IRA and lots of tax benefits that are available are creating a really, really frothy, robust market in the climate tech space in the next couple of years.
Yeah, exciting. It feels to me maybe more of and I mentioned this, I think, on our last show, but some of the larger, medium to larger companies, more of the market movers, even getting a bit more involved this year than maybe even we had felt last year. You mentioned a little bit in your journey as far as sentiment goes in both in the industry and just public sentiment around renewables and clean tech. How has that shifted since maybe you founded SunEdison and had to grow that business to now, and what were some of the challenges in helping people maybe
Sure.
outside of the industry understand?
Sure. So, I mean, certainly we started SunEdison in 2003,
Yeah.
and we invented the idea of a power purchase agreement, which was the idea that's very standard today.
Yeah.
But I'm going to put solar on your rooftop. You're not going to own it. You're not going to operate it. You're just going to buy the electricity from it. And when we first suggested that to a bunch of Fortune 500s, they said, "You're going to put 3,000 holes in my roof, and I'm not even going to own the system. That makes absolutely no sense. I'm never going to do that." And now it's a standard today. So I
Yeah.
think early adopters were really early adopters in the early 2000s. There was a lot of uncertainty about the technology, and there remains uncertainty about some different technologies in the climate tech space. Of course, direct air capture, hydrogen, all of these things, but there's lots of technologies where there's a ridiculous amount of data, including solar, including electric vehicles. So the technology risk is not an issue. So I mean, certainly the sentiment is very, very different from that perspective. And you're seeing, lots of people have become billionaires investing in climate tech. So whether you care about climate or not, you can make an awful lot of money if you're running
Yeah.
a really, really amazing climate tech company. There's also a ton of regulatory forcing. So, there's requirements, there's solar renewable energy contracts, there's IRA requirements. There's still lots of regulations that are taking place that are either providing tax credits or tax benefits or grants or loan guarantees. There's just a plethora of money available to promote climate change reduction via climate tech startups.
Yeah, and there's even roles that we recruit for at this stage of Piper Maddox and with some of the larger companies we work for that are solely focused on increasing that sentiment in the market. And I think the number one skill set that maybe smaller to medium-sized companies are looking for, and we'll get into some of this, is taking that technology and from a commercialization standpoint, bringing that to market in a successful way. Because
For sure.
I think a lot of people say, rising tide raises all the ships, and that's definitely a strong sentiment I felt in
Yeah,
renewables. But there's still a level of competition, and the economics behind it are kind of the crucial piece. So I'm sure you felt a lot of that in your career. But
100%. Yep.
and then getting into a little bit of your background, you've obviously had a pretty wide variety of experience at a leadership level.
Mhm.
Crucially, around talent, what were some of the intangibles you looked for in specifically leaders that you were bringing on board? Maybe even in the early goings, and then now, how's that changed, if at anything?
So when I hire people earlier in the career, what I really look for is curiosity and grit. So I don't need you to know everything about everything as a young person. And in fact, that really turns me
Yeah,
off in terms of when you're interviewing with me and saying, "Oh, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this." Probably haven't done all of those things if you're 24, right? So so I
yeah,
think it's really sort of being curious about learning it, and under the umbrella of curiosity, being a good listener. There's lots of people in this space who love talking and don't listen. So the curiosity is really important, and then the grit. So, early stages, are you willing to just roll up your sleeves and do whatever you need to get done? It's not often very sexy. I mean, you call it, bottle washers or whatever, but it's like,
mhm,
you need to go find office space for us. We don't have anybody else to do it right now, and we need an office. Or I'm going to go figure out this thing, and you're going to have to figure out this thing, and neither of us know what we're doing, and we're going to just have to figure it out. So I think earlier in your career, it's really curiosity, your ability to listen, and your grit, and sort of composure under pressure. I think later in your career, listening matters even more.
yeah,
I think, egos become exponentially bigger the higher level you get in your career, and there's a lot of people with very fragile egos in this industry, and a lot of people who don't listen. And so I think listening might be even more important. Having a level of humility is really important in people's careers. But certainly having the pattern recognition is critical. So, the reason I keep getting these different roles is because I've done something similar and I understand it, and I can use what I've learned in my last opportunity for the next opportunity. And so, what I have learned, the hard way and the easy way is a lot of it, especially at the higher levels, has a lot to do with how well you interact with the other people in at sea levels, right? So it's
yeah,
about, do you trust each other and respect each other? Do you give each other, the level of authority that you're needing? Do you delegate appropriately? I love managing people. I'm a very good delegator. Not a lot of people are. There's certainly people who
yeah.
micromanage or are just bad managers, right? And so what I find in as I hire higher level people, is really, is there the right level of trust and respect and communication? And that's more important, frankly, than any skill you could possibly have.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Listening as a recruiter is obviously a very important skill as well. So that's definitely shown out quite a bit. I'm sure there were some different challenges to you back in the early to mid 2000s from a talent standpoint, and really at any level than there are now, just from a volume standpoint. There's a lot more people in the industry, but there's
Yeah.
also a lot more companies, a lot more competition to bring people on. Do you feel that sentiment is true, one? And what were some of the challenges maybe in the early goings, and how have those changes, if at all?
That's an interesting HR question. I mean, I think certainly there were not nearly as many people who were interested in
Yeah.
this industry 20 years ago. I mean, it wasn't really a quote unquote industry. It was a bunch of, folks that were kind of putting things together, and it was interdisciplinary. And it's like, okay, I need a lawyer, but there are no environmental lawyers who know anything about this. So I'm going to take somebody from the transportation industry and he or she's going to learn about whatever we need to do with solar renewable energy credits or, so I mean, there wasn't the level of specialization for sure, right?
Yeah.
You were not pigeonholed as much because nobody had done a lot of the things before. Whereas today, yes, thank goodness. I mean, there's environmental science degrees and there's lots of people who are thinking about things in a very interdisciplinary fashion. And there's so much more education and so much more research and so many more things have happened. So it's a lot more fun. Sure, there's more competition, but I think
Mm.
it's very encouraging as someone later in their career to see so many young people interested and wanting to get really really involved, and that, in my humble opinion, is the most important thing. Like, I've spent a huge part of my career mentoring younger people, particularly younger women,
Yeah.
because I feel like the thing I can do that's more important probably than anything else is training our next generation of climate tech leaders, right? And
Yeah.
that is the only thing that's going to make a big difference in climate change. Is we all have to do our own part, and then we have to train the next generation of leaders.
Outstanding. Yeah, 100%. I would fully agree. I guess for more senior people in the market, C-level executives, or people maybe
Uh-huh.
looking to be founders in the future, even could be younger per se, you being a quite successful founder, and having a good feel in the investment side of the house, et cetera. What's your biggest tip for somebody that might be founding a business in this space, or starting up some kind of product, et cetera?
Biggest tip if you're founding a company. Well, it's I there's a there's a whole bunch of ways you could answer that question. I mean, I
Yeah.
think as a founder, often you're a founder of a technology or a service or a product. I think certainly one of the biggest pitfalls I've seen, that's a pattern that happens over and over again, is not doing your go to market research well enough. So it's not understanding your market enough and typically overestimating demand for your product or service. And so I think there's
Yeah.
never enough research that one could do about, my widget's quicker, better, faster than anybody else's. But there are political and regulatory risks. There's a lot of, issues like, a lot of us founders are optimists by heart, and we think, oh, somebody's going to change what they're used to doing,
Yeah.
and hence, it's no big deal. They're going to want to change what they've done for the last 35 years and buy my product. And that simply doesn't happen, right? Optimists believe that's going to happen, but the inertia is really, really powerful. I think that's the case in the electric vehicle space, as an example. It doesn't matter how cheap EVs are going to be or how much range they're going to have. There are plenty of people who never want an electric vehicle simply because they're used to doing what they've done. Dealers
Yeah.
don't make any money on electric vehicles. They lose money on electric vehicles because dealers make their money by operations and maintenance, and there's not a lot of operations and maintenance that is needed for an electric vehicle. So they have no incentive, literally none, to sell electric vehicles. And so, the Pollyanna-ish view that everyone's going to have an EV by 2030 is it's just flat wrong. So I think, a lot of founders are by default optimists, which is a wonderful thing, but often not understanding the market as it is in reality.
Yeah, outstanding. I mean, it's definitely not a one size fits all approach, but
Yeah.
like you said, being not necessarily a pessimist, but balancing that, and understanding your challenges and doing more research and strategy up front. And not even necessarily for a founder in the space, but even for somebody maybe more senior in their career, potentially stepping into a new role, really understanding what that looks like and what the challenges will be. What is your advice then for somebody maybe starting out their career across any vertical within the space that might come from certain underrepresented groups, like you said you've worked with quite a bit in the past, women, et cetera? What would your advice be for people in that category? And do you have any even resources or ways that people can grow their career or look into from
Sure.
that perspective?
Sure. I mean, certainly take as many finance classes as you possibly can. He or
Sure.
she who manages money runs the company. So I think what I find time and time again, unfortunately, is that often underrepresented early starters in their career have not taken enough finance classes. Even if you don't like finance, I actually don't care. You need to understand how to read an income statement, a balance sheet, and a cash flow statement. And, working at an investment bank can be a complete grind and miserable, but it's also a really good way to get started. So anyone that doesn't know finance should take as many finance classes as they can, even if they don't like it, because that's what builds and makes companies fail. There are tons of resources, many of which are regional. So WRISE, Women in Renewable and Sustainable Energy, is a great organization for women. There's NUI, which is the New England Women's
Hmm.
Group. There's a ton of resources, and maybe I can put together a list and we can put it on your podcast.
That'd be great.
But there's a whole bunch of resources, and there's actually lots of resources that investors have in terms of finding a career. So, investors invest in a lot of different portfolio companies, and those portfolio companies are often looking for people early in their career. So Powerhouse.fund, as an example, has a career webpage, and there's tons of information available about different opportunities and that are stemming from the portfolio companies that Powerhouse Fund invests in.
Yeah.
There's an organization called Ally, ALLY. I'm an investor in it, full disclosure,
Great.
is trying to support educating women who are coming from different parts of the energy industry and are trying to get climate tech jobs. And there is a job board associated with that. So there are actually lots and lots of resources available. It's unfortunately still very, very regional.
Yeah.
And still lots of things, women still do not get the majority of investments, and women are still a very small part of the C-level.
Right.
But we're not the only woman. I am not the only woman in the room anymore. In the solar industry, Abby
Mm.
Hopper's done a wonderful job with the Solar Energy Industry Association. She created a group called Solar Sisters. And I think, advice for younger people is really reach out to as many people as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And don't be shy. I mean, anyone that you really want to have as a partner and someone who you respect and like, if they won't spend 20 minutes with you over a Zoom coffee, you probably don't want to spend time with them anyway.
Sure. Yeah, 100%. My next question was going to be around how does that change, if at all, for middle to maybe up to C-suite executives, but you kind of answered it there. Maybe across the board then for any type of talent, we've talked about it a little bit, but for people transitioning from maybe a different industry or something completely outside of clean tech, there's a big interest from people coming from finance is probably an easier
Yep.
one than others, but even
Yep.
traditional energy or traditional technology trying to transfer into clean tech. What do you think the best way is for people, maybe at a mid to senior level in those spaces, to advocate for themselves or find roles in the space? Do you think there's certain verticals that are maybe more open to it than others? I'd say I'll give my take in a second, but
Yeah,
yeah.
please. Yeah. No, you go first. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's certain like products and technology verticals that are maybe a bit more open to people outside of industry. My focus in clean fuels, hydrogen, carbon
Mhm.
capture, and other sustainability technologies, I think are a lot more open to people coming from oil and gas, as an example, other than
Sure.
more developed industries like electric vehicles or energy storage, even parts of solar are probably a little bit more segmented, and they're naturally looking for, at least through our recruitment, for people that come from that industry and are maybe a little bit less open to it, but that's kind of a general feeling.
Well, I think we only have our experiences. I mean, I certainly there are people who have been in the solar industry for a long time at this point, but direct air
Yep.
capture or, waste heat to energy, or, there's so many different fields where there's still not that many experts because it either hasn't
Yeah.
existed for a long time or there just aren't very many companies that are doing it. I mean, I think it really depends on what your focus is. I mean, finance, at some level, finance is finance in the
Hmm.
sense that, if you know a lot about project finance, doesn't matter if you've done project financing for solar or for a widget
Yeah.
or for something else. If you're a project financer, you know how to do it.
Hmm.
Marketing, as a counter example, like it's always helpful if you understand the industry a lot better to do, brand strategy, marketing strategy, vision, mission
Yeah.
statements, all of that stuff if you come from the space. So, I mean, I'm not trying to not answer your question, but I think it really just depends on what your skill set is and how
Yeah.
you can transfer it. And unfortunately, it really depends on the network that you've created. I mean,
Hmm.
LinkedIn really is an amazing resource at this point, and
Yeah.
reaching out to people. Again, I find that, I understand the character of people quite well if I reach out to them and say, you don't know me, but I'm interested in blah 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 and would like to get your point of view on it.
Yeah.
It's fine with me if somebody comes back to me and says, "I'm just too busy now. Go talk to this person." But people who don't respond, I mean, that's not the sort of person you really want to be around anyway.
Yeah. 100%.
So yeah,
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 we've mentioned it time again on this podcast, but networking and LinkedIn probably most premier is such a catalyst for your career, and whether reaching out to somebody like Claire or myself. I mean, Piper Maddox has a role, obviously doing proper recruitment in the space, but there's tons of
sure.
informal stuff. This podcast being an example
Yeah,
of things we can do to help network people, and I think in this space the sentiment is really strong, and everybody's so mission driven that for the most part, I
yeah.
think a lot of people would find success in that way. So I'm glad you've mentioned that.
Yeah, and
Um,
I do think, I mean, as I said, I think the regional part really does make a difference. I mean, I know there are lots of people who love to work remotely, but I'm a big,
mm,
being in touch with other people. So I think trying to find events in your area and in your region really make a big difference. I really think that. And there's such a
100%.
huge industry just in you could go every week to a different conference at this
Yeah.
point, the renewable energy and climate tech space. I mean, there's conferences everywhere all the time, and some
Yeah.
are more valuable than others. I've never found a job going to a conference, but I've also never found a job, working with a recruiter before. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it just depends, it's building your network, and the easiest way to build your network is to meet humans. There's no
100%.
better way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll coagulate some of the resources we mentioned here in the show and put that
Yeah.
in the description for the podcast. I'm sure I'm definitely open to it, Claire, open to people reaching out for any kind of tips and advice in that sense.
Yeah.
But
Of
that's kind
course.
of
Yeah.
all the main questions I had as far as that type of topic goes. Some more traditional questions we'd ask every leader that comes on the show. First one being, what's the number one thing you look for on a resume when you're reviewing somebody to potentially work at a role in your company?
Certainly. Yeah. So I do look at how long they've been at an organization,
Hmm.
and I do look at um, whether or not they've been consistent in the role that they've played at different organizations. So, as an example, I've mostly been a chief operating officer at the
Hmm.
past bunch of organizations I've been a part of. But, have you switched from thing to thing to thing, or have you stayed pretty consistent? And really just your level of grit, so how much detail do you have on your resume, and
Yeah,
how um what have you I mean, what have you really been able to say you've executed on? I help people write resumes all the time. I think you have to quantify as much as possible, use action
100%.
verbs as much as possible, be very concise and clear. But it's one of those things. I mean, I'm often looking at 200, 300, 400 resumes for one role,
Oh yeah,
and you got to do something that's really interesting to me to wow me. And
yeah.
having a personal section is something that I also think is really important. And at the very top, having something very clear about what your why is.
Mm, yeah,
Um,
mission statement, call it.
yeah, a mission statement, or what makes you tick, right? Like
Yeah,
why do you do what you do? And why are you excellent at it? I mean, oftentimes I have people asking like, "Hey, would you introduce me to blah blah blah?" Which I'm happy to do, but send me the top 3 bullets of why I should drop everything I'm doing when
yeah,
I receive this email to respond to you, because there's
yeah.
just so much noise, so much noise. So you got to bop people over the head with like, "I am the biggest badass, and you have to stop what you're doing and talk."
Yeah, 100%. That's all terrific. I'd probably agree with all of it. I mean, like I said, I probably look at 100, 200 resumes a week. The first thing that jumps out, and I think the cliche is recruiters, everybody probably only looks at a resume for 30 seconds, which should be a lot more than that, but that probably is the average realistically. So format is one of the big things that jumps out. And then, like
Sure.
you said, either through bold or in bullet points, making as much clear action word statements as you can, and really
Yep.
quantifying a lot of the impact you've had is 100% going to get you at least at the top of the pile. Because what you'll find, I mean, you could be the most qualified candidate in the world, but there's tons of other good qualified candidates out there per se. So, like you said, standing out and being unique in a resume can be difficult, but is crucial.
Well, and also don't embellish. So,
Yeah.
I have found plenty of resumes where you said, well, I financed hundreds of millions of dollars or
Yeah.
this, or, had 700 people work for me or whatever it is. And it's like, how is that
Yeah.
actually possibly true? I mean,
Yeah.
and I have people who talk about themselves a lot and talk about, how fabulous they are. And again, that gets
Mhm.
back to sort of the listening thing and the EQ or
Yeah.
having antenna of just like, you really just have to put in the effort and work your butt off for a really long time.
Yeah.
And the grit and consistency and determination, like there is no motivation. Like it's just how are you going to get every single day you're going to get up and work your butt off because you
Yeah.
care about climate change and you care about making a difference and you want your company to be successful. And how do
Absolutely.
you show that in a resume?
Yeah. As simple as that.
Yeah.
Moving maybe once they've landed the interview, well, I guess different kind of question. You as a hiring manager, what was your favorite interview question that maybe was a bit unique, or was there one that you always liked asking? Anything come to
I
mind?
didn't have one. It depends
Yeah.
upon what role and what level, but I often ask, where do you want to be 5 years, 10 years, and 15 years from now across all aspects of your life?
Hmm.
So, that is certainly work, but depending on what, where you are in the interview process and all of that,
Yeah.
it's interesting to see people react. I do love asking the question, you know, and this actually comes from a Robin Arzon quote,
Mm.
which I love. She's a Peloton instructor, but like, if what would you do if you were twice as confident and twice as strong? I love that
That's a
question
very
because
good one.
yeah, because you never know how people are going to respond.
Yeah.
I like really digging in and understanding people's personalities because there's a
Yeah.
lot of information you can get off of a resume, but sort of
Totally.
the mechanics of how well are people going to work together and how do they
Hmm.
learn
Yeah.
is just so important. It's every new opportunity I have that is underscored is just sort of how do you learn, how do you process information, how do you organize your thoughts, and why do you think the way you do? Are you
Yeah.
do you share or not share? Are you, how honest are you? Do you there's a variety of ways to get at that question,
Yeah.
a series of questions, but it does take a lot of time. And I have a lot of appreciation for the people, the HR people who do the work
Yeah.
to make sure people have the right fit.
Yeah. The motivations and kind of intangibles aspect is really important. Probably even more for senior candidates. I'd say maybe some lower level or individual contributor roles that really are focused on a hard skill set, or maybe it's a bit more black and white. But yeah, as you
Yeah.
rise through your career, speaking to your motivations is really important. So hopefully some hiring managers listening can garner a couple questions from you, or people can prepare for their next interview with Claire. But that's all the main questions I have for you. Do you have any questions for me, or that I can give insight into what Piper Maddox is seeing, or anything else?
Yeah, so I would love to hear from you about sort of what type of candidates are the hardest to hire. I'm
Mm.
sorry, back up. What type of positions are the hardest to hire for?
That's a very good question. The first thing my mind goes to is just logistics are what makes roles really tricky for the most part. As far as like on site, if they're in a big metropolitan region, it's much easier. If they're in
Yeah.
the middle of the Midwest, it can be a lot trickier. So that's probably the most black and white answer for you. But the biggest need our clients usually have are senior individual contributors up to that early leadership position, let's say 7 to 10 years experience. That's just where the largest volume of hires is. And therefore, that's where the most competition is in the market. And that's not necessarily a bigger talent pool than, like more junior positions. So that's where it's the trickiest, I think, on our end, Piper Maddox, to sell to candidates versus
Okay.
more junior positions, and maybe even some more senior positions are probably a bit easier to sell to. So yeah, I hope that answers your question logistically.
Yep.
If I missed something,
Yeah.
but
Well, and then another question would be, how do you test
mm,
for fit between different people
yeah,
at senior
it's a good
leadership positions?
It's a good
Yeah.
question. So, especially for more senior positions, myself and I think most of my colleagues will usually break up. If it's a new candidate we've not spoken with, of course, a lot of people in our network, it'll be a lot easier because we've already got a feel for them.
Sure.
But if we're just reaching out to somebody for the first time, usually I like to break it into two different conversations. The first one is just about them, what they're looking for. I always ask people, why did you respond to my message? Like, why are we talking? Basically, I know the answer,
Yeah.
but what's your answer? And usually they'll just start talk and give a full run through of their background, what they're looking for, et cetera. And this is before I've even mentioned what role or maybe multiple roles that I've reached out about. Candidates, as I'm
Yep.
sure you would agree, will tell you what you want to hear for the most part, as they should. But like you
Sure.
said, to
Yeah.
get around some of that embellishing, I like to keep it as open-ended as I can. In the early going, somebody will tell me kind of all about what they're looking for, and then I can match it up with the opportunity and we can break it down
Mhm.
before maybe they've had the chance to advocate for themselves. So yeah, I think two-pronged conversation is important. And then once I know they'd be interested in the role, then we can really dive in and understand their background, how it fits, et cetera. So that's great for more senior candidates. I'd say for more
Yeah.
junior positions, usually we'd be able to reach out about multiple roles at once. So
Sure.
then you can just kind of relate those. But for more senior roles, usually we're only reaching out about one, maybe one at a time. So it's a bit different, but yeah.
Yeah. Cool. It's very interesting. It's a very intricate job.
Yeah,
You
it's tons of fun. It's an
HR
exciting
recruiters.
space.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
It
well,
is.
I appreciate you coming on the show. To everybody
My
listening, much
pleasure.
appreciate your time. Really excited for the next few episodes. But yeah, Claire, again, really appreciate it. We'll leave some of these resources we mentioned here today in the description. And then, yeah, I think we're going up just at the start of March. So much appreciated and take care, everybody.
Thank you, Alex. Take care.
Cheers. Cool. All good.